Ethan had always believed that family was supposed to be constant, something you could rely on no matter what. Growing up, he watched his parents struggle with money, and when he became an adult with a stable job, he made it his mission to help them. For 2 years, he gave them $700 every week. It wasn't just money, it was a symbol of care, a way to keep them comfortable and supported. He never thought twice about it. His wife, Maya, often reminded him that it wasn't a small sum, but he insisted it was worth it. He thought this gesture of love and duty would be appreciated, expected even, because family did not owe him thanks, right? He had assumed loyalty. Worked both ways. The morning of Lily's 6th birthday was bright, filled with the kind of anticipation only a child could have. Ethan had spent the previous week preparing for it, making sure every balloon was in place, every plate clean, and every tiny detail perfect. Lily had chosen her favorite pastel colors for the decorations and insisted on an inflatable castle. In the backyard, Ethan smiled as he watched her bounce around with her friends, her laughter like music. He couldn't help but glance at the driveway, expecting his parents to pull up at any moment. They had always been early, never missing a family event. It was a tradition. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. Ethan's parents didn't arrive. At first, he thought maybe traffic had slowed them down. But as the minutes turned into hours, anxiety began to gnaw at him. He pulled out his phone and called them. No answer. He sent a message. Seen, but no reply. Every moment the disappointment in Lily's eyes grew. She didn't understand why her grandparents weren't there. Ethan tried to distract her, but he felt a knot tightening in his chest. This wasn't just about missing a birthday. This was about the betrayal of trust, the idea that family should be there when it matters most. By evening, after Lily had blown out the candles alone and the children had gone home, Ethan's phone finally rang. It was his mother. Her voice was calm, almost casual. We couldn't come today, Ethan. Something came up. We'll explain later. Ethan felt a cold wave wash over him. Something came up. That was the excuse. He tried to keep his voice steady, but it trembled anyway. Something came up. Lily's birthday. Our child's special day. It's important. There was a pause. Then, without another word, the call ended. The next morning, Ethan drove to their house. He didn't knock politely. He wasn't in the mood for politeness. When the door opened, he saw his parents sitting comfortably as if nothing had happened. There were no apologies, no hints of urgency. He looked at them and asked directly why they hadn't shown up. His father hesitated, and his mother's eyes flickered briefly before they settled on him. We had plans. A game with friends. We needed a break. We didn't think it was such a big deal, his father said, his voice soft but firm. Ethan froze. His mind raced. He replayed every moment of the previous day, the balloons, the laughter, the empty chairs. The betrayal wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, quiet, and sharp. His parents had chosen a casual game over their granddaughters. Special day over him and Maya's efforts to create a memory she would never forget. That tiny phrase, "We didn't think it was such a big deal," echoed in his head. They didn't see what they did as wrong. They didn't understand that this wasn't just about money or convenience. It was about care, about respect, about being present when it mattered. Driving home, Ethan felt an unfamiliar sensation. It wasn't anger yet, not entirely. It was heavier, more calculated. It was the kind of cold clarity that comes when you realize that someone you trusted doesn't value what you value. For the first time, he saw his parents differently, not as the people who raised him with love, but as flawed humans who made selfish choices. His heart ached for Lily, who had waited all day for them, whose tiny hands had reached for grandparents that never came. He thought of the money he had given them, week after week, and how it had meant nothing in comparison to their absence. As he parked in his driveway, Ethan's mind began to twist the day into thoughts of revenge. It wasn't a rash feeling. It wasn't a scream of anger. It was slow, deliberate and focused. He pictured cancelling the weekly payments, watching them struggle for comfort, feeling the discomfort of waiting for support that never came. He imagined showing them that actions mattered more than words, that promises and obligations were not things to be taken lightly. But as quickly as the thought came, guilt tugged at him. These were his parents, after all, the people who had loved him in their way, who had sacrificed for him in the past. Could he really let anger dictate his actions? Could he become someone who punishes instead of protects? He replayed their words over and over. We didn't think it was such a big deal. Ethan realized that this was not just about missing a birthday. It was about a fundamental disregard for what others hold dear. Their casual dismissal of a day so important to Lily and to him was the ultimate betrayal. It was proof that no matter the money, no matter the care, some things could not be bought or replaced. Love and presence couldn't be transferred or scheduled. They had to be chosen. And his parents had not chosen. That night, Ethan sat in his living room, staring at Lily, asleep in her bed, surrounded by scattered decorations and leftover cake crumbs. The pain of the betrayal was mixed with a strange clarity. He understood that his parents' actions would not go unnoticed, that their absence would have consequences, not just for them, but for the way he now saw family, trust, and loyalty. The idea of revenge settled in him like a shadow, quiet at first, then growing. It wasn't about anger. It was about balance. They had taken from him something priceless: his trust and the joy of his daughter's birthday. Perhaps it was time they understood what that felt like. He thought about the weeks of payments he had made, the time and energy he had invested, and the empty chairs at the party. The betrayal was not loud, but it was sharp. And as Ethan looked at the empty driveway one last time that night, he made a decision. He wouldn't forget. He wouldn't let it slide. He would make them understand the weight of their choice. But more than that, he would have to navigate the complicated path between anger, justice, and forgiveness. The seed of revenge was planted, but whether it would bloom or wither depended on him. By the time the clock struck midnight, Ethan had made up his mind to confront his parents, not with shouting or accusations, but with a cold, deliberate action that would make them feel the absence they had inflicted on him and Lily. For the first time, he realized that love and loyalty were not automatic. They had to be earned and respected, and when they weren't, consequences would follow. This understanding, heavy and sharp, marked the beginning of a journey not just about revenge, but about self-respect, boundaries, and the painful, necessary growth that comes when those you trust betray you. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the way his parents had dismissed Lily's birthday. Their words, their casual excuse echoed in his mind constantly. We didn't think it was such a big deal. Those words weren't just careless. They were deliberate. They showed a lack of care, a lack of respect for the moments that mattered most. Every time he replayed the scene, the image of Lily blowing out her candles alone burned in his memory. The laughter of her friends, the decorations he had painstakingly prepared, all felt hollow because the people who should have been there, the ones who had taken his weekly support, were absent by choice. The feeling that settled inside him wasn't immediate anger. It was a slow, gnawing bitterness, like a shadow that followed him everywhere. At work, he found himself distracted. Meetings blurred into one another. Reports sat untouched on his desk as he stared out the window, thinking about the injustice. His colleagues noticed the change, but Ethan barely cared. Nothing around him mattered as much as the betrayal. When he returned home, he was quiet, reserved. Maya noticed the shift immediately. She could sense the tension radiating from him, the silent storm building behind his calm face. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" she asked one evening as they put Lily to bed. Her voice was gentle but probing, like she could feel the turmoil in his mind. Ethan nodded, unable to hide the truth. They didn't just miss her birthday. They chose themselves over us, over her, over me. Maya sat beside him on the couch, placing a hand on his arm. "What do you want to do?" she asked. The question struck him harder than he expected. What did he want to do? The thought of revenge entered his mind almost immediately. Not a rash, emotional reaction, but a calculated plan that slowly took shape. He imagined cutting off the weekly payments. $700 every week had become routine, almost invisible in the larger scheme of their lives. But that money represented more than financial support. It symbolized trust, loyalty, and a bond he had maintained for years. If he stopped it, even temporarily, they would feel the loss. They would understand the cost of their actions in a way words could never convey. Yet Ethan hesitated. These were his parents, people who had raised him, shaped him, and loved him in their own imperfect ways. Could he really punish them? Could he allow anger to guide his actions and make him someone he didn't recognize? The internal struggle was intense. Every plan he imagined was weighed against his conscience. Revenge could feel satisfying, he realized, but it could also leave a wound inside him that no apology could heal. The shadow of what-ifs lingered, whispering doubts at every turn. Despite his hesitation, the betrayal demanded a response. Ethan observed his parents' routines closely, noticing subtle patterns he had overlooked before. They spent hours on trivial activities, leaving work unfinished, prioritizing convenience over family. They didn't seem to regret missing Lily's birthday. In fact, they seemed entirely unaware of the impact of their absence. That awareness or lack of it only fueled Ethan's desire to make them understand. If they wouldn't see the pain they caused, he decided he would make them feel it. He started small, visiting only occasionally and acting indifferent. He maintained politeness, but there was a cold distance in his tone, a careful avoidance of intimacy. His parents noticed it, but their reactions were superficial. No apologies, no probing questions, just casual conversations that ignored the underlying tension. That behavior, the lack of concern, ignited a new layer of frustration in him. They were still living comfortably, still prioritizing their comfort over family, unaware of the emotional storm they had created. Ethan began planning more seriously. He reviewed his finances and thought strategically about the weekly payments. Canceling them wasn't about cruelty. It was about making them aware of consequences, showing them that choices have effects. It was about boundaries, about asserting that love and care could not be bought or demanded. They had to be given freely and respectfully. Each night, he imagined different scenarios, withholding the money, seeing their reaction, forcing them to confront the emptiness they had created. In Lily's life, each scenario was calculated, deliberate and precise. But alongside the planning came guilt. The thought of taking action against his own parents weighed heavily. He questioned himself constantly. Was this revenge, or was it justice? Did they deserve punishment, or were they merely human, making mistakes in ways he hadn't considered? The struggle tore at him. On one hand, he wanted them to feel the absence, to understand the sting of being chosen last. On the other hand, he didn't want to become someone cold, vindictive, or cruel. The line between justice and cruelty blurred in his mind. Sleep became harder. He would lie awake at night, imagining Lily's smile, then contrasting it with the empty chairs at her birthday. His anger and guilt intertwined, forming a knot that he couldn't untangle. Maya would occasionally wake to see him pacing silent, but tense. She didn't scold him, didn't offer simple solutions. She let him wrestle with his feelings, knowing he had to come to a decision on his own. Her quiet presence, steady and reassuring, gave him space to process the turmoil without judgment. As the days passed, Ethan began observing his parents more closely, not in a mean-spirited way, but as part of understanding how to approach the situation. He noticed patterns of avoidance, casual excuses, and a lack of accountability. Their dismissal of Lily's birthday wasn't an isolated incident. It was a reflection of how they often prioritized convenience over responsibility. This realization strengthened his resolve. The betrayal was bigger than one missed birthday. It was about values, priorities, and the lessons being silently taught to his daughter about what matters in life. Ethan's mind became a balance between strategy and morality. Every step he considered, whether it was halting payments, confronting them directly, or creating situations where they had to face their choices, was carefully weighed against the consequences. He imagined the conversations, the discomfort they would feel, the questions they would ask themselves about their actions. But he also imagined the internal cost, the strain on his conscience, the potential bitterness in his heart, the possibility of becoming someone he might regret being. Through it all, Ethan never lost sight of Lily. She was the anchor in the storm of his thoughts. Her innocence, her laughter, and her trust in the people around her reminded him why boundaries mattered. He didn't want revenge just to punish. He wanted it to teach a lesson, to protect her from being overlooked, to ensure that family bonds were respected. Every plan, every imagined scenario was filtered through that lens. By the end of the second week, the plan began to solidify. Ethan decided that action would be necessary, but it would not be impulsive. It would be measured, deliberate, and meaningful. He would confront his parents not in anger, but with clarity. He would make them understand what their choices had cost emotionally, morally, and relationally. He would do it in a way that preserved his integrity, while asserting the boundaries that had been ignored for too long. The shadow of revenge hovered over him, persistent but no longer chaotic. It had become a force of focus, driving him to consider every angle, every possibility, every potential outcome. It was not about hatred. It was about accountability. It was about teaching a lesson without destroying relationships, about enforcing boundaries without causing unnecessary harm. And as he prepared mentally, Ethan realized that this journey would test more than his ability to plan. It would test his patience, his restraint, and his moral judgment in ways he had never experienced before. He knew the climax was coming. The confrontation, the decision, the moment of truth, where he would either act on his plans or find a different way to channel the anger and hurt. Until then, every interaction, every observation, every thought was part of the build-up. He wasn't just planning revenge. He was preparing himself for the emotional and psychological toll it would take. The days stretched ahead, tense and uncertain, each one drawing him closer to a moment that would define the boundaries of respect, love, and family loyalty. And through it all, Ethan held on to a single thought. This wasn't just about money, or a birthday, or a missed event. It was about teaching lessons that couldn't be taught through words alone. It was about showing that actions have weight, that choices matter, and that love and respect cannot be assumed, they must be honored. The desire for revenge had become a careful, deliberate instrument, a reflection of both his pain and his commitment to fairness. Every decision, every plan, every sleepless night brought him closer to a moment that would test not just his parents, but himself. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, falling across Ethan's desk as he sat staring at his computer screen. The cursor blinked over the automatic payment setup he had scheduled for his parents' $700, the same sum that had flowed into their bank account every week for years. His finger hovered over the mouse, the weight of the decision pressing on him like a physical force. Today would decide everything. He could cut the payments, force them to feel what it was like to be ignored, make them realize the consequences of their absence at Lily's birthday. Or he could find another way, a path that maintained his integrity and preserved what remained of the family bond. The choice wasn't simple. Revenge had become a constant shadow, shaping his thoughts, his sleep, his interactions. He had imagined how it would feel to stop the money, to watch their confusion, to hear them realize what they had lost. He had rehearsed the words he might say, the expressions he might see, and the lessons they would finally understand. But alongside the desire for payback was the knowledge that actions driven by anger could leave scars that never healed. He had spent 2 weeks wrestling with this inner turmoil, watching his parents closely, weighing his own conscience, and testing the edges of patience and restraint. Maya's voice broke his concentration. She stood in the doorway, coffee in hand, her expression calm but knowing. "Whatever you choose," she said softly, "make sure it's something you can live with. Not just today, but a year from now. Make sure your choice doesn't hurt you more than it teaches them." Ethan nodded. Her words, simple as they were, carried weight. They reminded him that revenge could be temporary satisfaction, that the consequences would last far longer. He closed his eyes and thought about Lily. Her innocence, her joy, her trust in the people around her had been shattered for a brief moment by his parents' absence. The memory of her lonely candle blowing lingered vividly in his mind. Every other scenario, the anger, the confrontation, the withholding of money was filtered through her presence. He realized that whatever he did had to protect her emotional well-being, while still addressing the betrayal. It had to be thoughtful, measured and meaningful. Ethan took a deep breath and opened a blank message window. He stared at it, the cursor blinking at him as if asking for his decision. His parents had not only missed Lily's birthday, but they had also shown a pattern of carelessness that could not be ignored. He wanted them to understand what it felt like to be overlooked, to see the consequences of their actions without being destroyed by punishment. He wanted them to feel accountable, but he did not want to stoop to cruelty. His finger hovered over the keyboard. He began to type. "I've been thinking about the payments and the choices you've made. You missed Lily's birthday. You said it wasn't a big deal. I want you to understand what that feels like. I'm stopping the weekly support for now. This isn't about revenge, it's about boundaries. You can be part of our lives if you choose us, not the convenience of a schedule or comfort." He paused. The words were firm, deliberate and calm. They reflected his pain, his disappointment, and his resolve, but they were not written in anger. He could almost hear the tension in the room when his parents read them, the pause before realization, the confusion, the self-questioning. This was his revenge, not through destruction or malice, but through clarity, through truth, through the consequences of absence. Ethan pressed send. The message went out, and immediately he felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief, because he had finally taken action. apprehension because the moment of truth was approaching. He didn't have to wait long. Within hours, his phone rang. His parents' voices were trembling, soft, uncertain. For the first time, they were asking questions not about themselves, but about their actions. "Ethan, we didn't realize how much we hurt you," his mother said, voice shaking. "We missed Lily's birthday. We weren't thinking. Can we see her? Can we talk?" Ethan listened quietly, letting their words sink in. They sounded genuine, even vulnerable. This was the moment he had hoped for, not to punish, but to make them understand. Their guilt was real. Their awareness had shifted, and the lesson was beginning to take root. He didn't respond immediately. He allowed the silence to stretch, letting them feel the weight of the absence they had caused. Then he spoke carefully, choosing his words. "You hurt her, and you hurt me. That's true. But this isn't about hatred. It's about respect. You can be part of our lives, but it has to be because you care, because you prioritize family, not convenience." His voice was calm, resolute. There was no anger, only clarity. In the days that followed, Ethan noticed a change. His parents approached him with caution, their words careful, their presence deliberate. They apologized again, this time without excuses or dismissals. They visited Lily, not to make up for the birthday, but to participate in her life meaningfully. Ethan saw small gestures, moments of genuine connection, and realized that his choice had created a shift, not through punishment, but through the establishment of boundaries and accountability. The act of withholding support had not been motivated by cruelty. It had been motivated by love and protection. Ethan realized that revenge could take many forms, and sometimes the strongest form was not destruction but discipline, not anger but measured action, not malice but clarity. His parents had faced the consequences of their actions, and through that experience, they began to understand the importance of presence, care, and respect. Ethan reflected on his own feelings. The desire for revenge had been intense, almost overwhelming, but it had been channeled into a form that was controlled and purposeful. He had not lashed out, shouted, or destroyed. He had simply asserted boundaries, and in doing so, he had protected his family and maintained his own integrity. The satisfaction he felt was subtle, not explosive. It was the quiet assurance that he had acted thoughtfully, that he had balanced justice with compassion. He watched Lily play in the backyard one afternoon, her laughter light and carefree. His parents sat nearby, helping her with a puzzle, engaging genuinely for the first time. In weeks, Ethan felt a wave of relief. The lessons had been delivered, the boundaries respected, and the relationships preserved. The desire for revenge had been satisfied not through pain, but through understanding, accountability, and the restoration of respect. Ethan realized that the entire journey had been about more than a missed birthday or $700 a week. It had been about teaching lessons that could not be taught through words alone. It had been about showing that actions have weight, that choices matter, and that love cannot be assumed. It must be earned and honored. His parents had learned this, and so had he. By the end of the week, the weekly payments were reinstated, but under new terms. They were no longer automatic or unquestioned. Ethan had established a system that reflected respect and accountability. The money was no longer a symbol of blind loyalty. It was a symbol of mutual responsibility, a reminder that family required care, attention, and integrity. Ethan felt a sense of closure. The anger that had consumed him had transformed into clarity. The betrayal had been addressed, and the lessons had been delivered. The journey had been painful, intense, and emotionally demanding, but it had also been illuminating. He had learned that revenge could take many forms, and that the most powerful forms were those that taught, protected, and preserved. As he watched Lily hug her grandparents, laughing without fear of neglect, Ethan understood the true value of his actions. Revenge was not about destruction. It was about correction. Not about malice, but about clarity. And sometimes the quietest, most deliberate act of justice had the strongest impact. Ethan realized he had grown through this experience, gaining insight into human nature, family dynamics, and the delicate balance between love and accountability. The climax had been reached, the decision made, and the consequences faced. Through it all, he had protected his daughter, asserted his boundaries, and preserved his integrity. And in that moment, he understood the ultimate lesson. Revenge could be a tool for growth, not just punishment, and sometimes the most profound. Satisfaction came not from inflicting pain, but from creating understanding and respect. The journey had tested him, challenged him, and ultimately strengthened him, leaving him with clarity, peace, and a deeper appreciation for the importance of family, accountability, and the choices we make.